Right. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. All right, so we'll continue what we talked about last time. So last time we were doing the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, if you guys remember. And sorry, I'll go over kind of just the basic premise of the book. And it's basically a book that C.S. Lewis wrote about demons talking to one another, right? So the main demon is Uncle Screwtape. He's in the voice that you're going to hear. He's like the older demon. And then there's the younger demon who he's training, okay? And so every time he refers to someone as the enemy, he's talking about God, right? Because they're the demons. And when he talks about the patient, he's talking about the person that each demon is assigned to tempt and trick and stuff like that. Last week, we talked about the law of undulation. And the point he wanted to make was the young demon was saying, hey, he's kind of cooling off a little bit. He's not as into the spiritual life. doesn't have as much fervor as he used to. And in his report, he said that's a good thing. And then Uncle Screwtape basically, dismantled him, right? And said, didn't you learn anything in the College of Devils? And basically said, what about, he said, think of him as humans. Humans are these, he called them amphibious creatures, right? Remember he said, they're half spirit, half man, half human, half body. And that the body part, because humans are in time, that they undulate, right? That they change. And one of the only things we have that's constant is change, right? And that we have ups and downs, we have good time and bad times, peaks and troughs, and that these are normal, right? And we talked a lot about that last time, about how, especially at our age, right, that this is a very normal thing, right? And that these peaks and troughs don't just occur on one dimension. They're not just spiritual peaks and troughs, which there are, but there's also emotional peaks and troughs. And then there's peaks and troughs in my friends. I've got a really good friend week, right? I go out with my friends, I have a good time, and then I have a good week that's really bad. And then I've got a really good work week where things go well with my boss and I get my job. Then there's a really bad work week. And I have a really good school week and a really bad school week, right? And things are oscillating up and down. And basically, that these things can crisscross, right? So you've got a good friend week and a bad spiritual week and a good whatever, school week all in the same week, right? One thing's up, and then the next month, it's all the opposite. And every once in a while, right, we all know that everything lines up bad, right? You see one of those 2 weeks that's like friends are crappy, church is crappy, parents are crappy, everything's crappy, right? And then you get one of those couple of weeks that everything just lines up good, right? And what he basically said is that this is ultimately a very normal cycle of being a human being, right? And we talked about how that's okay, right? And then this next letter, right, so the first one was the law of undulation. The next letter now, he's going to talk about how the devil can take advantage of this situation, right? And so let's start listening into what he says. So this is the trough period. This is the low period.
Though this trough or dryness which your patient is experiencing at present will not of itself give you his soul, it needs to be properly exploited.
Okay, so right off the bat, he's saying the trough will not give you the soul, right? That the demon isn't going to win because your patient is in the trough, which is what the demon thought last week. I got him in a trough, I'm winning. And he's like, no, that's not going to do anything, okay? But what he's going to say is now that the trough period, if properly exploited, can be, right? And one of the basic principles we talked about last week is what the demon's going to basically do is going to say, well, what does God want from this trough period? And I'm going to do the opposite, right? And we talked last week about how much the trough period, and we'll talk a little bit more this week about that, how much the trough period was the period of growth, right? That's where God meets people, right, in those trough periods, right? And so the most activity spiritually, both good and bad, happens in the trough, right? The peaks aren't about, the peaks aren't that exciting, right? The troughs are exciting, right? Because God is trying to achieve something, and according to C.S. Lewis, Satan is trying to achieve something at the same time, right? So when you're down, and you're in those down periods, lots is happening, right? Spiritually and otherwise.
That's when the man...
Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong button. I
Though
started
this trough or dryness which your patient is experiencing at present will not of itself give you his soul, it needs to be properly exploited. I do find the noise and pollution of the city inspiring.
Uncle? Uncle?
Oh, yes. I have always found that the trough periods of the human undulation provide excellent opportunity for all sensual temptations, particularly those of sex.
Well, I would have thought sex was more of a temptation during peak periods.
Why would you think that?
Well, more physical energy and therefore more potential appetite.
Oh, good answer. But you must remember that the powers of resistance are then also at their highest. The health and spirits which you want to use in producing lust can also, alas, be very easily used for work or play or thought or innocuous merriment. The attack has a much better chance of success when the man's whole inner world is drab and cold and empty.
So this is a very important principle, right? So the idea is when we sin, it's usually when we're down, right? When we're discouraged, when things are just not going the right way. And that's when you sort of mess up the most, right? And sin, and he's talking about sexual sin here, but there could be any variety of sins, right? That's when you're most prone to lie, or you're most prone to just get angry and lose your temper and judge someone and hate someone and get pissed off at someone, right? When other things are down, right? So the first lesson in all of this is just awareness, right? Which is when you're down, like, we have this expression, hangry, right? You're compromised because you're hungry, right? And now you're angry, hungry, okay? And so the first lesson here is just awareness, right? When I'm down spiritually, I'm going to fall into more sins, right? I'm going to fall into more judgment and anger and resentment and bitterness and, hatred and sex and greed and all of the things, right? Because my defenses are down, right? And so, the devil had the young devil had a good answer. He's like, well, you've got more energy, and so you're going to be more, sexually active. And he's like, no, that's not the kind of sexual activity. That's not the kind of temptation we're looking for. We're not looking for that kind of excited. We're looking for depravity. We're looking for brokenness. We're looking for depression, discouragement, right? And these are the weapons of Satan, right? Discouragement and depression and, just feeling bad about yourself, feeling bad about who you are, feeling bad about your prospects and just like, I'll never amount to anything and I'll never become anything and those are the words of Satan. Those are his ways of attacking us.
And it is also to be noted that the trough sexuality is subtly different in quality from that of the peak, much less likely to lead to the milk and water phenomenon which the humans call being in love.
Right, so what he's basically saying is like sexual activity when you're down doesn't lead to love, right? And so he's like, you don't want to encourage sexual activity when he's up on a peak because then it turns into something good, right? Because love is giving, right? Love is sacrificial. Love thinks of the other person, right? And so you're not going to be in a position to love in a trough. You're going to be in a position to love in a peak, right? When I'm full, when I'm ready to give, okay? And so he's saying, if you encourage any sexual activity, then it'll turn into love. You don't want that, right? Which is an interesting thing for the devils to say to one another, right? We don't want them to what? Love one another, right? And that's where this is leading, right? We don't want them to give to one another. We want them to take from one another, right? If you guys remember last week, the expression he used is what? That God really, really loves these people, right? And he doesn't want to assimilate them. He wants them from the inside to be inspired to be like him. And then he used this expression. He said, we think of them as food. He thinks of them as sons. Remember that? Right? So Satan is very okay with consuming people, right? And then he encourages us to consume people, right? To consume each other, to use each other, to extract from each other, to take from each other as much as I can get out of everybody, right? And there are people whose that's the way they live. That's their mindset. What can I get from every person I encounter? What can I extract? How much can I get out of them? Right?
No. During trough periods, patients are more easily drawn into perversions, much less contaminated by those generous and imaginative and even spiritual concomitants which often render human sexuality so disappointing. It is the same with other...
And so this is a very important point he makes here. Like, he says when they're in their peak periods, then human sexuality is so disappointing, okay? Which, obviously, for the Satan to say that means it's a good thing, right? Which I think points to a very important aspect, right? Which is sometimes, I think, something we hear a lot, right? That sex is bad and that we have to stay pure and that we can't let ourselves, And there's a lot of this talk, right? And it gets to the point where sex becomes this really horrible thing that I have to avoid at all costs until I'm married. And then I have to, do it right away, right? And that kind of whiplash for youth is sometimes very difficult, right? You're told to avoid the other sex at all costs and stay away from them, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, now go get married, right? And this actually carries over to some people's marriages, right? There are some people who, even after they're married, they think, sex is bad, right? And there are people who have issues, right? Because they're so hardwired to think this is just such a bad thing, right? And so this is a place where we actually differ from the Western church, right? So like in the Catholic Church, contraception isn't something that's allowed, right? And because sex is something that's tolerated within marriage for the purpose of procreation, right? And that's the language. It's tolerated within marriage for the purpose of procreation. So that's why contraception isn't a thing that we do, right, in the Catholic Church. But in Orthodoxy, that's not the case, right? So St. John Chrysostom talks about how the marriage bed is undefiled, right? And that isn't the way we think about sex, that sex is a gift from God for a married couple anytime. It's not something we do just for the purpose of having children, and that we should not do it if we don't have children. That's why you see some Catholic people, 7, 8, 9, 10 kids, right? And there's every once in a while you meet an Orthodox person. Dale, quiero. It's only 7:45, Habibi. I'm just kidding. It's right here in the front. Right here in the front. La, tfaddal. And that's why occasionally you'll actually meet an Orthodox person who'll say the same thing. I remember meeting an Orthodox priest who was like, no, contraception is not okay, right? This is not, I don't think, something that's Orthodox, right? And so what he's alluding to here is that the devils are even saying that type of sexual activity creates a love that we don't want, right? So because it's Satan, it's the negative, right?
Other desires of the flesh. You are much more likely to make your man a sound drunkard by pressing drink on him as a painkiller when he is dull and weary than by encouraging him to use it as a means of merriment among his friends when he is happy and expansive.
All right, so again, he's saying you want your patient, right, the person, to be a drunkard, to be an alcoholic. You got to push alcohol on them when they're down and they're depressed. Right? That's when you want them to drink. If you push alcohol on them, merriment with their friends, right? They go out with their friends and it's New Year's Eve and you want to have a glass of champagne, you're not going to get a drunk out of that person, right? You get them when they're down, you get them when they're in the trough, right? So even something that isn't necessarily a super bad thing, like having a drink, right? If you use it at the time of the trough, it actually is now a weapon, right? Which is, again, a very important concept for us as spiritual people, that there's no absolutes, right? We like absolutes. We say, is it haram to drink or not, right? First of all, that's haram is an Islamic word, right? And we don't do that sort of thing anyway, right? But we want those answers, right? Can I go to this or not? Can I do this or not? And it's like, it's not that simple, right? Can I drink alcohol or not? Well, are you in a trough? Are you down? Are you sitting there home alone in the dark and you can have a bottle of whiskey? Yeah, I'd say not a good idea, right? How about we go out and go bowling? That would be my advice. But if, you're out and your friend just had a baby, or you're, just New Year's and you want to drink, have a good time, right? That's a very different situation, right? And that's where the wisdom of having a father or someone to advise you comes into play, right? It's not simple answers that we're looking for, right? Is it haram to drink or not? It's context, right? How old are you? Why are you doing it? How much do you drink? When do you drink? These are the kind of questions that someone who's kind of trained and looking and listening for the right answers is going to be able to say, you know what? Maybe let's cut out the drinking at home by yourself, and let's cut out this, and let's cut out that, but it's okay to do it at this time. Make sense?
Never forget that when we are dealing with any pleasure in its healthy and normal and satisfying form, we are, in a sense, on the enemy's ground.
That's perfect, right? Whenever we're dealing with a pleasure in its healthy form, we are on the enemy's ground, on God's ground, right? And he's going to say something here in a second that I really like that I'll point out when he gets there. But he's talking about pleasures as God-given, right? And that's important. Pleasure is not evil. It's given by God, right? All the pleasures of the body are given by God, right? He made them, okay? And I'm not just talking about sexual. I'm talking about food or just kind of enjoyment of any music, all of these things, right? These are God-given pleasures, right? And so when he says, whenever a pleasure is healthy and in its natural form, we're on the enemy's ground, which means that if I'm Satan, what do? I just have to take the pleasure and make it not healthy in its natural form, right? If I can just reverse it, right? Multiply it times -1, right? I make it different than what it is. And that's all I have to do to win, right? As Satan. Make sense? And so sometimes we get so caught up in pleasures are bad, right? Whatever pleasure it is, and that's not Christianity. Pleasure is, in Islam, for example, when the Taliban took over Afghanistan, one of the things they got rid of was music, right? Because it's a pleasure, okay? And every once in a while, you'll hear a good meaning Coptic person say something like that, like, "Musica di haram," or "Harry Potter is haram," or whatever, right? And you're just like, wowzers. Where's this coming from? It's coming from Islam, right? It's coming from pleasures are not okay. And that's not true, right? Pleasures are God-given. All these things are God-given.
But surely we've won many through pleasure.
But we have. All the same, it is his invention and not ours.
I like that. It is his invention and not ours. God made pleasure. And then look at what he says next.
He made the pleasures. All our research so far has not enabled us to produce a single one.
All of our research has not produced a single one. I love that.
All we can do is to encourage the humans to abuse or misapply the pleasures which are...
There it is, right? We can encourage the humans to abuse or misapply the pleasures.
Enemy has produced. Hence, we always try to work away from the natural condition of any pleasure to that in which it is least natural, least redolent of its maker, and least pleasurable. And
that's very deep. We take the pleasure and move it away from the natural use that the maker imagined it, and least pleasurable. Did you catch that? That's very deep, right? We make the pleasure the least pleasurable, right? So even taking the thing that God created and using it in a way, you make it so it's actually a lose-lose for you, right? And this is the deeper thinking about why the church says, let's avoid this thing and let's go to this thing, right? Because what Satan does is he takes the pleasure and makes it less so. Right? It's kind of like you've ever, like Halloween, right? A little Snickers bar, fantastic. The 80th one, not so much, right? Because now you've moved away from the intent, right? From the way it was, humans are not supposed to have, 700 grams of sugar in a night, right? So it's just not a good idea. So what happens is you've taken the pleasure of the mini Snickers and you've made it less pleasurable because you added gluttony to it, right? You added 80 of them, okay? And so it's the same kind of concept, right? When we take something that's normally healthy and happy, even something like laughter, right? You can just go too far, right? Anything can be taken too far, right? And so what God is trying to do is he tries to keep us in a bound a natural bound of intent. Like, you know, when you buy a car, right, and it's got a red line, right? You've got an RPM, like the tachometer, and it goes to like 6,000, right? So the engineer designed the engine to have a bound, right? Outside of this bound, outside of 6,000, you're now damaging the engine. You're redlining it, okay? And below 2,000, you're not getting much torque, right? There's this sweet range. Okay, and so many of what God teaches us, the way he wants us to live, is in that range, right? And so when we go outside the range, we're like, aha, I'm winning, I'm going outside the range. No, you're just outside the bound of where the pleasure is pleasurable. Does that make sense? Because now I've overdone it, I've overindulged, right? And so God's commandments aren't, if you do this, I'm going to send you to hell, right? It's, if you do this, you're just going to lose out on life. Right? You're going to lose that. You know, Christ even said, I came to give you life and life more abundantly. Right? This was Jesus' promise.
Ever increasing craving for an ever diminishing pleasure is...
There, okay. Sorry, I know I'm interrupting a lot, but let me just rewind.
Always try to work away from the natural condition of any pleasure to that in which it is least natural, least redolent of its maker, and least pleasurable. An ever-increasing craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure is the formula.
A craving for an ever-diminishing pleasure, right? And this is actually something we find a lot, right? That when we go after the thing that we think we want the most, whether it be a person or school or a degree or a car, that after we get it, there's this ever-diminishing pleasure, right? It's not what we thought it was going to be. It's never as good as we thought it was going to be, right? And you even see this with people on vacations, right? And they think, oh, this vacation is going to be so amazing. And then it's not, right? It's just, you know, and we have whole industries devoted to chasing these things, right? I mean, you watch any commercial about, you know, some vacation or cruise ship or something, everybody's happy, everyone's excited, you know, they put hot stones on your back and all your problems go away, right? They put mud on your face and you look good, right? And all this is this chasing, right, of this non-real world, right? And there's millions and hundreds of millions of dollars devoted to convincing you to buy the thing that will supposedly make you happy, right? And that could be in any industry, whether it be clothing or electronics or vacations or experiences or whatever.
More certain, and it's better style, to get a man's soul and give him nothing in return.
Get a man's soul and give him nothing in return. And how many of us have felt that, right? After we think we get the thing we wanted to get, you feel nothing, right? You feel like that wasn't worth it.
That is what really gladdens our Father's heart. And the troughs are the time for beginning the process.
To get the man's soul and give him nothing in return. Brilliant.
But there is an even better way of exploiting the trough.
Yes.
You do it through the patient's own thoughts about it. As always, the first step is to keep knowledge out of his mind. Do not let him suspect the law of undulation.
All right, so now this is where it gets tricky, right? And we'll try to follow along as we go through it, right? Is the first thing is in the trough, now you got to start playing mind games with the patient, right? So the first thing he said is don't let him suspect the law of undulation. Okay, so the first thing we want to get out of people, the Satan wants to get out of people's heads is that people go up and down. You know, convince your patient that this is weird. And we talked a lot about this last week, right? That it's not weird. Okay? And as soon as you can convince your patient that there is no law of undulation, that it's really weird that you're down and it's really weird that you're going through this, right? Now I can start to work more effectively. Right, so that's the first thing he says.
Tim assumed that the first ardors of his conversion might have been expected to last, and ought to have lasted forever.
All right, so that's important. The first hours of his conversion should have lasted forever. Right, and if you'll, I mean, let me go through this. Right, so when we have these experiences with God, that we think to ourselves, you know, how come I don't keep having these experiences with God anymore? Right? And in this case, they have someone who converted, who felt God's presence, and now he's like, well, where's God's presence? So he's telling him, tell the patient, to convince the patient that the first hours of your conversion should last forever. right? That it should be this way forever, right? And now what do you have? You basically have a drug addict, right? So now you have a religious person who's going back for that experience, right? Who's trying to go back and get that first religious experience, okay? Which is a lot like a meth addict, right? Or any addict who has some, or cocaine or whatever, right? One of these drugs that gives you a very, very powerful rush initially, and then you're always chasing the rush, right? And you live your life chasing the rush, okay? This can easily be applicable to a religious experience, right? Where I'm chasing that rush again. I'm chasing that feeling. So what he's saying is convince your patient there's no undulation, there's no ups and downs, and those first hours of your conversion should last forever. And the fact that they're not is kind of weird. There's something wrong with you. Make sense?
And that his present dryness is an equally permanent condition.
Boom. Your present dryness is an equally permanent condition. Despair, hopelessness, right? I will never feel that again. I will never be happy again. I will never have a spiritual life again. Your present dryness is equally permanent. There's no undulation, right? And sometimes just giving yourself that undulation, the knowledge that I go up and down is huge, right? Just don't feel bad about it.
Having once got this misconception well fixed in his head, you may then proceed in various ways.
Right.
It all depends on whether your man is of the desponding type who can be tempted to despair, or of the wishful thinking type who can be assured that all is well.
So there it is, right? So the attack, and this is why the spiritual father is so important, the attack is a function of you. If you're the despondent type, right, you're the one who's like, it's never going to be good, and it's always going to suck, and it's always, then Satan attacks you one way. But if you're the wishful thinking type, and you're the guy who's always going to chase that high one more time and always go back, and then he attacks you a different way, right? And that's why, again, the bouncing it off somebody else, right, is so important, because they can see that more clearly than you can. Make sense? And now he's going to go through the two different approaches. We only have 2 minutes left.
The former type is getting rare among...
The former type, the despondent type, is getting rare. So there are less people who are just giving up.
humans. If your patient should happen to belong to it, everything is easy. You have only got to keep him out of the way of experienced Christians.
An easy task now.
There it is, right? So he said, if you have a despondent type, a hopeless type, keep him away. It's easy. Keep him away from experienced Christians, right? Because an experienced Christian is going to say, yeah, you're down. Yeah, it happens. You're up. It happens. That's it. And then the person feels better, right? I was with a couple the other day, and they're telling me about a fight. And yeah, that's a pretty normal fight. Yeah, that happens all the time. And they're like, really? And they both looked at each other. That makes us feel a lot better. So this is normal? I'm like, yeah, this is normal. This is Tuesday. I had this fight with my wife yesterday, right? So, I mean, this is, what you're talking about here is just really nothing. And they felt so much better that it was normal, right? So, again, if you stay away from an experienced Christian who's going to tell you, yeah, you have your ups and downs, and sometimes, it's good, and sometimes it's bad, then it's easy, right? Just keep them away from these people. Make sense? Again, keep them away from an experienced father or spiritual guide or whatever the case may be.
Nowadays.
And to direct his attention to the appropriate passages in Scripture. Then to set him to work on the desperate design of recovering his old feelings by sheer willpower and...
Boom. So set him off on recovering his feelings through sheer willpower, right? So now things are bad. It's never going to get better. You're despondent. You've got despair. Now will it back. Fight for it, right? And we see stuff like this, right? You have to read the Bible every day. You have to pray every day, right? And I'm gonna will this back. And they're like, I don't feel anything. Well, you read more. Do more matanyas. Fight for it. Will it back. You can't, right? Because God gives. You can't, so if I want God to reveal himself to me, that's my desire. that may not be God's desire. And I'm not going to force his hand. I'm saying, I'm gonna read chapters until you show yourself to me. Well, now that's just me wanting, right? And me forcing. God will touch people's lives when he's ready, when those people are ready to be touched. And you can't will it into existence. You can't fight for it. You can fight for it, right? But you can't force it.
Is ours.
If, however, he is of the more hopeful type.
All right, so now we're going to switch to the other type. This is the hopeful type, right? That's constantly going to search and want. And
Your job is to make him acquiesce in the present low temperature of his spirit and gradually become content with it, persuading himself that it is not so low after all.
All right, so now this is the other type, right? So which is basically saying just succumb, right? Just sit in it. Allow it to be normal, right? Stop fighting. And this is an equally dangerous situation, right? Where I acquiesce, okay? And I allow the current, he said, current low temperature to kind of be the norm, right? To just, and this is, again, what the book of Revelation talks about, right? You can be hot or you can be cold, but don't be lukewarm. Either be on or off. Either fighting or you're not, right? But the worst place we're going to go to, right, is that lukewarm state where we're just kind of putzing along, right? And what's most dangerous about orthodoxy is it enables people to stay in this state for a very, very, very long time, right? Because I can be in that state and I can still do a lot of things, right? I can attend 7-hour vigils during Kiak. Now, you're not telling me I'm lukewarm now, right? I just attended Sebar Ba. I just said all the four hoses in Coptic, right? And I said the long Tinthino. I'm therefore holy, am I not? Right? So I can do a lot of things, right? You're not telling me I'm lukewarm. That's ridiculous, right? I'm going to attend Eid. I'm going to start at 7 p.m. and go till 1 o'clock, right? That's a 5-6 hour Eid. And I'm going to do Gregorian, I'm going to do all the things, right? You can tell me I'm lukewarm? I can't be lukewarm, right? So orthodoxy allows me to drug myself, right? And to think that I'm not acquiescing, that I'm not lukewarm, that I'm actually knocking out of the park. I learn hymns that no one knows, for crying out loud. I say things that no one understands. I'm going to levitate soon.
In a week or two, you will be making him doubt whether the first days of his Christianity were not perhaps a little excessive. Talk to him about moderation in all things. If you can get him to the point of thinking...
Okay, so let me just stop there. Make him think that his first religious conversion was excessive, right? And tell him, you got to be moderate, right? Stay down, okay? And once you can convince him that first conversion was excessive and not real, and then you enable him to just stay at a very lukewarm and cold state, right? Like one of the things, I remember for those of you guys that came when Emba Buddhas came to speak about at the Wednesday meeting. You guys remember he came to the park? The Emba Buddhas is the bishop from Africa. And when he came to the park, right, there's so many people there, right? And he talked about Africa and mission. I don't know how many of you guys were there. And everybody was just like, this guy's amazing. And so many people texted me and said, this was amazing, and I want to go to Africa, and I want to, do all, grab the lion by the tail and spin it around and do all the things, right? So that's wonderful, right? So the next week, I came out, and a lot of people were there, and I said, how many people attended Emba Buddhas' talk? And all these people raised their hand. And I said, how was it? They said, it was amazing, it was life-changing, it was the best talk ever. So then I asked him, what did he say? How many people do you think got the right answer? They're like, I don't remember. I don't remember what he said. So he was life-changing, life-altering. You want to, go to Africa now and quit college, and you don't know what he said? And so I told him, I said, I'll tell you what he said. He said, Jesus loves you. That's the summary. But it took him 45 minutes. So why did he change all your lives? Because I just said the same thing. So why did he change all your lives? Because he's fire. He's fire. That's why he changed your life. It had nothing to do with what he said. It's him, right? And so what Satan is telling the little Satan to do is you got to get the guy to acquiesce. To say, no, that first fire, that's just not a thing. And there's this wonderful quote, one of my favorite quotes, Saint Marie of Paris. And she says, Christianity is either fire or it is nothing. There's no in between, right? And very consistent with the verse in Revelation, right? You're either hot or cold. It's either fire or nothing, right? So once you get to that acquiesce stage, once you get to that lukewarm stage, once you get to that, yeah, I go to the things and I say all the words and I attend long services, I'm fine, right? Then Satan's won, right, at some level, many levels.
Thinking that religion is all very well up to a point, you can feel quite happy about his soul.
Brilliant.
Okay. A moderated religion is as good for us as no religion at all.
There it is. A moderated religion is as good for us as no religion, right? And every once in a while, I remember getting this, hearing this from people, right? From servants, from parents, don't get too crazy with this religion stuff. It's good. You attend church, and church is there to keep you off drugs. Right, that's the reason we bring the kids to church, right? We just don't want them sleeping together, and we don't want them doing drugs, and we want them to go to college and getting into a good undergrad, right? So that's kind of so moderated religion is what we're looking for here. Don't get all caught up with all the, and there are parents who give their kid this advice. They'll see their kid really get into church, want to go to Africa, want to go here, and they're like, what about summer school? Don't you take, Math 102, right? I mean, that's not more important. What about your future? And you'll see the parent moderating the kid. Right? It's a horrible thing to see, but it's there. And he says, so moderate religion is as good as no religion, and he's about to finish the statement.
And much more amusing.
And much more amusing.
But when should I attack his faith directly? Persuade him that it's all a lot of rubbish.
Only when you have caused him to assume that the trough is permanent can you persuade him that his religious phase is going to die away like all his previous phases. In fact, the mere word phase will very likely do the trick.
There it is, right? So the phase, he said just using the word phase, like this religious phase, there's just a phase in your life, it's going to die away like the others. And once you can convince him that that's happening, right, then you can attack his faith directly. Right? Because now the whole thing I experienced, it turns out, was just a farce from the very beginning. The whole thing was really just kind of whatever, right? And again, going back to the thing he said like a few minutes ago, right? Get the idea of undulation out of his head, right? There is no undulation. You don't have it? Oh, it's gone, right? And so that thing you had was just a phase. It's gone. It's over. I don't even know what we're doing here anymore. Okay, 50 seconds.
I assume that the creature has been through several of them before, and he always feels superior and patronizing to the ones he has emerged from. Not because he has really evaluated them, but simply because they are in the past. You keep him well fed on hazy ideas of progress and development, I trust.
I do.
And give him lots of modern biographies to read. The people in them are always emerging from phases, aren't they?
So they are.
You see the idea? Keep his mind off the plain antithesis between true and false. Nice, shadowy expressions like, it was only a phase, or, I've been through all of that, are indispensable to us. Oh, and don't forget that blessed word, adolescent.
So adolescent just means it's a naive thing, like that religion is some kind of naive concept. Okay, I'm done. Any questions, comments? Yes, sir.
The moderate religion thing reminded me of a quote that my brother told me. It was that God created us in his image, and we return the favor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. God created in his image, likeness. Yeah, I mean, and you'll see that, right? I remember watching a show once. Maybe I shouldn't talk about this. There's a show called Donahue back in the day, right, where this guy named Donahue, he'd interview, is Maury Povich still on? Did anyone see that show? No. Okay, so it's there's got to be an equivalent now. Bridezilla. I don't know. There's something where you interview the most disgusting people on earth, right? And then you want to watch them because they're disgusting, right? And so it's very important that you feel superior to these people. And so he interviewed this, Donahue interviewed this prostitute who was a pastor. I know, he's just trying to get a reaction. I mean, it worked. I watched the whole thing, right? So his objective, check, right? He got his commercial time and all the good things, right? So, and so she said, look, her response was something like, look, there's 10 commandments and I do 9 of them, right? And she's pretty decent, she's like, look, I'm better probably than most people in this audience, right? I'm killing it on 90% of this stuff, right? Which I thought, but I mean, but if you think about like the answer, it actually is something we all do, right? Which is like, look, we rationalize, right? We say like, I don't do this. I have this one thing I do, right? But everything else I'm great on, And what am I doing? I'm creating my own religion, right? I'm making it the way I want it to be. I'm making God in my image, right? And saying, God doesn't mind if I steal because I'm doing it for my kids, right? God doesn't mind if I cheat because I'm doing it for my family. Which God are you talking about? Oh, the one you made up, right? The one who's in your image and your likeness. Oh, what a coincidence. You cheat for your family, and so God wants you to cheat for your family. What a coincidence, right? I've just reversed the thing. Yeah. Good.
What's the Father Gregory Boyle quote about making
he says, you know you've made God in your image when he hates the same people you do. Yeah, you know you've made God in your image when he hates the same people you do.
I found while you were talking about the pleasures, and how it's a very common device, right, where the religious, fanaticism to say that pleasure is bad. And we misunderstand and think that pleasure is bad because we've adulterated pleasure, and so bad pleasure is bad. And C.S. Lewis, in a book he writes, in a sermon, The Weight of Glory, this is from The Weight of Glory. It says
I read it.
Yeah. It says the New Testament has lots to say about self-denial, but not about self-denial as an end in itself. We are told to deny ourselves and to take up our crosses in order that we may follow Christ. And nearly every description of what we shall ultimately find if we do so contains an appeal to desire. If there lurks in most modern minds the notion that to desire our own good and earnestly to hope for the enjoyment of it is a bad thing, I submit that this notion is no part of the Christian faith.
Yeah. I mean, and so that idea of self-denial being the end in of itself, right? That's the objective as opposed to the self-denial for the purpose of pursuing God, right? Something's happening. Kiro. Tamliya Kiro. Good. Bain Halik. Any other questions, comments? No? All right. Glory be to God forever. Amen.